welcome to episode 2 of The Lost Boys. I'm Tandy, joined by Bo Matt Courier. Say hi, Bo Matt.
Hi, Bo Matt.
Welcome to the show. We got a nice one for you today. For starters, Matt, I'm going to let you talk for a little bit. I know that I bulldozed you in the first episode about my experience on my trip to Gen Con, but you actually had like a pretty nice weekend yourself this weekend, yeah? Tell me about it.
Yeah, so I went to Durham, North Carolina, just less than 3 hours, pretty quick drive on Friday night for it was a Magic the Gathering event primarily. Uh, Day one was modern. I kind of bombed out playing Burn, but then on day two, I played Mono Green and Pioneer and actually ended up making top eight. Got to meet and hang out with a bunch of people. It was called the Gathering actually, which
Fitting.
worked out. There was a ton of gathering. But I also got to play a bunch of Lorcana. I brought 3 decks with me. The aggro bodyguards deck that I posted about on our Patreon this week, and a control deck, and the kind of ramp combo deck that I've been calling Fast Bond.
So Fast Bond is a magic card for those of you unaware, and it was a card that lets you play multiple resources per turn. In Magic, they're called lands. So imagine a card that lets you play a bunch of resources per turn, aka I assume Bell, Strange but is it Strange but Special?
That's the one. Yep.
Yeah, that one's letting you play a bunch of extra inkwell or ink to your inkwell per turn, right?
Yeah. So there's Bell, and then the arguably, at least in this deck, better card, Fishbone Quill, which is an item that you can exert to put any card from your hand into your inkwell. So what you usually do with Fast Bond in Magic is you play cards like Wheel of Fortune that say everyone discards their hand and draws 7 cards, and then you just get to keep playing lands, and you have way more mana than your opponent. And coincidentally, Lorcana has the exact same card in A Whole New World. So the Fast Bond deck, as I'm calling it, is Steel and Sapphire. Is trying to draw a bunch of cards, get a bunch of ink into play, and then keep doing that and playing bigger stuff in your opponent.
I've heard that this build is decking people. Like, I actually thought that was kind of interesting because decking is something that we didn't really figure out too often in Magic until Millstone became like a popular card and like control decks ran the world. And is it playing anything like that, or is it like kind of combo-y, just like explosive?
No, yeah, this deck, I really haven't had that experience except when playing against like the control decks that will make the game go super long. But I'm definitely seeing people talk about this. They're playing A Whole New World in various other decks and just trying to play the card as many times as possible in a game and hope their opponent runs out of cards first. I'm a little bit skeptical as to whether this is a great strategy, but it's definitely like a weird and interesting thing that people are pretty excited about.
Yeah, I'm super stoked to play a Whole New World with all the mana acceleration or ink acceleration that we have. You know, there's Mickey Mouse Detective, there's One Step Ahead. You know, I think these cards are great. Even Gamma's getting in there, doing her best impression of Old Sakura Tribe Elder from Magic the Gathering. So, but we're not here to talk about Magic the Gathering. We're here to talk about Lorcana. And this weekend you played a little bit with those decks. So tell us your favorite of those 3 decks and kind of give us like your best 2-minute pitch on what that deck does, and let us know if you're going to be writing about it anytime soon for the Patreon.
Yeah, absolutely. So my personal favorite definitely is the Fast Bond deck. It's a Steel Sapphire ramp. Essentially, like I said, you're trying to get a bunch of ink into play and then draw a bunch of cards with A Whole New World. You also get cards like Tinkerbell Giant Fairy, of course, and grab your sword to keep your opponent under control. But one of the interesting things about this deck is that we found pretty quickly in testing that if you're playing against a control deck that has cards like Maleficent, Monstrous Dragon, and Hades, Elsa, things like that, you can draw you and your opponent a bunch of cards and still end up behind after they, get rid of your whole board with a Be Prepared or something like that. So we kind of needed another plan. So we're also playing Beast's Mirror, which is a 2-cost item. Yeah, that lets you pay 3 and exert it to draw a card if you have no cards in hand. So basically against these control decks, unless it's like a really good situation for you where they have a ton of cards in hand and they're behind on ink, you're trying not to play A Whole New World at all and just repeatedly draw cards with Beast's Mirror
Yeah.
and use your ink for that.
That makes a ton of sense. When we play Magic, there are different Wheel of Fortune type effects where you'll discard each player discards their hand and draw 7. And if you play it against an aggro deck with a bunch of burn cards in their hand, they can just use those resources and blast you down. And so you have to be
Right.
really careful how you use them. And with Whole New World, I think it's like people are getting introduced to this, from a different angle and in a different game. But a lot of those same
Right.
things are the same, where like it can backfire very easily. So you got to be a little careful when you do it.
Yeah, and like I was saying, I the first few experiences I had with a Whole New World, all turned out great for me, but I was only the one playing it like half the time.
All
You
right.
know,
Yeah, yeah,
like
yeah.
my opponent played it, and I'm like, oh, great, this feels excellent. I have everything I need.
Yeah. All right. So your release day for Lorcana, did you actually get to pick up any product when you were at the event? Was there any vendors there selling Lorcana stuff?
Uh, there were, I believe, my roommate Braden at Braden MTG on Twitter. He was able to get a hold of a few things.
Nice.
Ryan Presti as well at Tron is Bad. I was a little more focused on the Magic when all that was getting, picked over, but I was able to pick up some starter decks at our local store the morning of.
Yeah, I'd like to take this time to talk about my experience this weekend.
Yeah,
So the local game store around Roanoke, that's not the big one. It's called Blade Gaming, and Blade Gaming. I called them up on Saturday and asked them, what they were doing, and they said they were having a big release event on Sunday, starting at 1 p.m. And so I got one of our directors to follow me down there, and we just went in under the expectations of meeting the players, talking to the store
yeah.
owners, picking up some product for ourselves, and that was that. When I got there, we got there a little early, I'll be honest, and it was like relatively empty, and I was like kind of disappointed at first, and I was like, okay, well, let's see if we can figure out what to do and still make something out of it. And we go up to the counter. I start talking to one of the owners, a couple of the employees, and I asked them, what can I buy? And they give me the short list of things that I'm allowed to buy, but there's like a limit to everything that you can buy as well because they just don't have the allocation.
Right.
And that was also a little bit of a bummer. So I was like, okay, let's just see what I can buy. I'm going to buy everything I can buy, and then we'll talk about it. And I got like a deck box, some sleeves, some of the starter decks, and that was it. That was all I could buy. Couldn't buy
Yep.
booster packs. They were saving them for organized play, and I was like, okay, well, they have like a little room upstairs. We went inside, and Dan May, our director, he was just like, recording me talking about the stuff we got, and we got one of the employees to come talk about Lorcana and
Oh, really?
the experience from that side of things. Like, what's the vibe been like? What's the whole shebang, right? And they were very excited about the game, and it got me a little more excited about the game just listening to him talk. It was really cool. And then
Oh,
we were there for about 15-20 minutes, and then when we come back
yeah.
downstairs, there's just like a full room.
Oh my God.
Yeah, like within 30 minutes, I think it went from being mostly empty to mostly full. And
Wow.
the one of the coolest things, and I don't want to like um set expectations like really high or anything like that, because this is a brand new game. There's like a lot of pitfalls that new games and new companies can get into, but like there was 30 people playing their starter sealed tournament, and it wasn't just a bunch of Magic players. It was
Right.
multiple people that I know, like friends of mine, who were there with multiple children of theirs that are now of age to start learning these games.
Wow.
Former coworker, current coworker of you, Jared Silva, was there with his two kids.
Yep.
And we got to talk to them, and they were having a blast. And they're big Disney heads, just like we all are. We're all big Disney heads. We all have Disney Plus. We all have access to these movies and watch them our entire lives. And like
Yeah.
now there's just like a whole generation of adults that get to share that with their kids. And there's a game that's like relatively easy to learn, but still has a lot of depth to it. And yeah, it was wonderful. And I got to interview a couple people. We did a lot of B-roll footage. We talked to some of the kids, with their parents' permission, of course. And
Mhm.
yeah, it was an amazing experience, very eye-opening for me.
Yeah, that's awesome. I wish I could have experienced some of that, but I'm gonna try to get out to the store these next couple weekends and see what they have going on as well.
Awesome. And I also want to give a little shout out to Blade Gaming for letting us come in there and do that stuff. We appreciate y'all. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. So, Lorcana Day release vibes, I would say, were immaculate, but we have some more stuff to talk about. So let's go ahead and move on to that. All right. So we're gonna start a new segment, and I haven't decided what to call this one yet, but it's just
Okay.
favorite card right now. Matt, give it to me.
It's Tinkerbell Giant Fairy.
Yes. Yes. But why?
It's just there's just so much you can do with it. Like, yeah, it wipes all your opponent's things, and you have this great safety blanket. But you can shift and sing something right away, or you can just start taking down bigger stuff. And you know what? It's even inkable. Like, I
Yeah, it
probably would have
is.
played this card without that.
Yeah, it is.
But sometimes you need to ink it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Steel wants to do area of effect damage. We shorten that to AoE
Yep.
just for those of you who are new to gaming terms like that. But area of effect or AoE is when you do small chunks of damage to like a group of
Right.
monsters or characters. And Steel does that well. And Tinkerbell is just like one example of it. Grab Your Sword is another great example of it. But there are other characters that, when they exert, they deal damage to something. So, like, you can
Yes.
find these little tricky combinations where you use Tinkerbell to just like chew up your opponent's entire side of their board. And that's why I like Tinkerbell a lot too. So
Yeah, so I was talking to someone about this weekend, where they were talking about Hans, the Steel Hans. It says when you quest with it, you do 1 damage to a chosen character, and they were saying they didn't really feel like the 1 damage mattered that often. But my experience has been the opposite
yeah,
with like Tinkerbell and Grab Your Sword and Fire the Cannons and Smash your steel decks that are playing all these cards, there's just damage kind of accumulating on your opponent's characters all the time. And Hans being able to just pick anything and finish it off has really been great. So that's another card I love, along with all these great steel cards.
all right. So I'll do mine now. So Matt, say what's your favorite card? Say it really loud.
All right, Todd, what's your favorite card?
My favorite card right now is Stitch Rockstar. This six
Hell
mana,
yeah.
this 6 mana Amber character, features the iconic Stitch up on stage singing his heart out, and he works extremely well with cheap characters that cost 1 or 2 ink. And when you play them, you get to exert them and draw a card. It can also shift, and it doesn't have to exert itself to do any of its abilities. And so, if your opponent doesn't directly
Right.
remove it or
Right.
exert it with one of their cards, like Elsa, you're going to be able to just kind of leave this in play unfettered and just chain around it with your cheap characters. And I think that some decks just won't be able to handle that. I think it'll be great for really aggressive decks to have this finishing move where they can play this character, and then on their next turn they just go wild. And even if you're able
Yeah.
to contain some of it, it snowballs from there, especially if you don't deal with the Stitch immediately. So big fan.
Exactly. Like, Tinkerbell is pretty good against Stitch, but the thing about the card Stitch Rockstar itself, all the characters you play out, a lot of them maybe get eaten up by Tinkerbell or Grab Your Sword, but Stitch with 5 willpower is like probably going to stick around. So you just kind of start forcing them to do this every turn. You
Right.
just reload, and your hand is still the same size.
Yeah, and I think you'll be able to get to some situations in games like this too, where you'll be able to shift onto a Stitch for 4 and then still have 2 or 3 ink available and use that to play 1 or 2 characters. And then it already has kind of replaced itself. Even if they do kill
Yeah.
it, it's very similar to in Magic, where like if something draws a card and you go and you destroy it, you're still -1 overall resource. And I think that in a game like this, the resource generation is very important because so many of the cards double as your actual resource in ink. And so you have to make these early
Yep.
game decisions like, do I play this as an ink? Do I hold it? How much ink do I want? And Stitch just kind of throws it out the window. The more ink you have, just like the more you can play these
Right.
little 1, 2 mana things to draw a card. It's awesome stuff. All right.
Right.
Moving on. So I know that you've been playing a good bit of Tabletop Simulator and Pixelborn, ways to play
Right.
Lorcana online, and we're going to have some videos coming out in the next week or two where we try to use those, and we'll also be using those to make competitive content where Matt and I do fight each other. And if that's something y'all are interested in, make sure to check out both Tabletop Simulator. It's on Steam, and Pixelborn. And I don't know where Pixelborn's at, but we'll put out like a link to how to do it and stuff.
Yeah.
Um,
It's out there.
And so, Matt, since you've been playing Constructed quite a bit, I know that you're pretty high on this Fast Bond deck that you've been working on with all of the ink acceleration with Bell and the uh, Whole New World where you draw 7. But is the Constructed format as a whole, I would like you to just spend some time explaining to me what you think Constructed Chapter 1 is going to look like, and like what decks or even what cards you think are going to be the most prevalent as well as most dominant.
Right. So last week I wrote an article that was just kind of a primer on Sapphire Ruby Control, which I called the level 1 of the format, meaning that like this is going to be our starting place. This is what the metagame is going to build around. And pretty quickly after that, we saw level 1 be iterated upon. People started playing Ruby Amethyst control decks, where you're still controlling the board with Be Prepared and Maleficent, but you're adding in card draw effects instead of ramp, like Friends on the Other Side and the Queen. And that pretty much that very strongly reduced the amount of Ruby Sapphire that people were playing, because it's really hard to beat, a deck that's playing the same board control tools you are, but also gets to draw more cards.
Yeah.
So that Ruby Amethyst control deck is very popular right now, and people are looking for as many ways as possible to attack that deck. Like Amber and Emerald, a lot of Amber decks. I know Amber Steel, a couple different variations are getting pretty popular. I've been enjoying one I built with a bodyguard theme. But people are also playing with Ariel and A Whole New World as kind of a song deck that's also including Stitch. And there's still, the more I play, the more I'm convinced like there's other decks out there. I'm exploring Sapphire and Amethyst with no Ruby at all. I'm exploring Emerald in various combinations. Steel, I think, has like the world at its fingertips.
Yeah,
You can pair Steel with almost anything, right?
Yeah, let's talk about Steel for a minute, because I actually really like some of, like, there's a couple of different really aggressive decks that a couple of people in our Discord have been working on and talking about. And I don't want to go like too hard on Steel, because we've already talked about how they do the AoE damage and the big Tinkerbell fairy and stuff like that. But I do want to note that Amber has actually been the color that I think has been the most aggressive in terms of how cheap the characters are compared to how much lore they can gain. And they have tons of defensive maneuvers with the bodyguard mechanic. And so tell me what you think about Amber as like a core identity in competitive Lorcana.
Yeah, Amber definitely has been the preeminent aggro color. Lilo is a big centerpiece of this. One of only 2 cards in the game that's 1 ink and 2 lore. So there's a bunch of these aggressive Amber decks. The best follow-up to a Lilo on turn 1 is a Simba. Amber Simba with Bodyguard is just incredible, right?
Yeah, so is that the one, is it 2/3 bodyguard? Is that why it's good? Because it has 3 toughness or 3 willpower?
Right, exactly. So if you start with a Lilo, your opponent starts with any of the other 1-cost creatures like Flounder, that's a 2/2. You get to quest with your Lilo, play a Simba Exerted, and your opponent is just way behind. So Simba definitely has been one of the most important cards for any aggro deck. Just as a common, it's like one of the best cards in the set.
Yeah, I know that the price actually on the baby Lilo is actually kind of going through the roof, because it is going to be like the iconic aggressive card. There's actually one other card that costs 1 that taps for 2 lore. What's the name of that one, and what color is it in?
That is Maleficent. I don't quite remember her name, but that's Amethyst. And exactly the same as Lilo, uninkable, 1-cost, 1/1 with 2 lore. I haven't seen as many Amethyst aggressive decks, which is interesting. One of our friends, Taryn from Apex Gaming, posted a very aggressive Amber and Amethyst deck, just as many cheap characters as possible.
Really using that mulligan mechanic to find those 1-drops, huh?
Yeah. Well, I don't know. He's got enough in there. I don't know if he ever needs to mulligan.
Fair.
But what he's really looking to do is play a 1-drop on turn 1 and then 2 more on turn 2. So can't really have enough.
All right. So that's kind of where we're at in the overall metagame. There's like a couple of aggressive decks running around. There's the ramp deck with some big finishers. Sapphire, I think, being the color that is ramping the most, feels like
For
it's
sure.
gonna have at the very least, it's gonna have like the biggest magnifying glass on it for a little while, just because people want to do the big splashy fun stuff. You know, accelerating your
Right.
ink in casting Hades, 7 mana Hades, a couple of turns ahead of schedule it's a very good feeling. I got to do it one time and it was quite strong, and my
Yeah.
opponent was really sad that their giant Stitch or Genie or whatever got put into the ink zone. So
Yeah.
okay. Other than that, we got a smattering of decks, but mostly people are just getting into the game in what I would consider a very au natural sort of way. People are getting the starter decks. They're buying 2 starter decks and smushing them together and getting a
Yeah.
few booster packs and then upgrading their smoosh deck together. And we actually had a really great article on that on our Patreon by another one of the Lost Boys, Zach Weaver, who's going to be helping us
Right.
do written content over on the Patreon. And all the articles that we have right now are going to be free until further notice. So make sure if you're interested in that type of written content, the very nitty gritty, how to get better at tournaments, how to understand the game better. If that's what you're looking for, our Patreon is going to be exactly where you want to go. And we're going to have a link on the bottom of the screen for you. It's
For sure.
patreon.com/lostboyslor. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at with constructed. But for me, I kind of want to talk about something else. Constructed's fun, but what about
hmm
limited? What about limited, Matt? What do you think about limited so far?
I can't wait to try it. I haven't gotten an opportunity yet to try limited, but I love drafting in Magic. I love cube drafting also in Magic. I'm really excited to check it out in Lorcana and see what that looks like.
Yeah,
How
so
about
right,
you?
I'm really looking forward to it myself as well. I've been really enjoying just playing with the starter decks against each other, and I know a lot of people have been doing the exact same. And I'm gonna like
Yeah.
teach my wife how to play Lorcana in a little while, and then she hopefully will teach some of her friends how to play. And we're doing that with the starter decks, and I think that they're a great
Yep.
tool for doing exactly that, because it's actually pretty hard to build a 60 card deck in constructed when you just don't have the ability to buy more than 6 packs at a time. So,
Yeah, that's true. It might take a while.
yeah. So make sure to check out the star decks. They're very good. But for actual limited, I want to go over some of the rules that they've kind of outlined. And if I make any mistakes, I'd love for you to correct me, Matt. But I'm going to give my best.
Sure.
This is what I think limited for Lorcana looks like. So for draft, you take 4 booster packs. You sit around in a circle. You draft the same way you would do in Magic, where you open a pack, you take a card, you pass 11 to your left, and you go around until the pack's done. Pack 2, you do the same thing in reverse. 3, you go back the original way. 4, you go back in reverse again. Once you're done, you'll end up with 48 cards. Now,
Right.
the format is prismatic, which means that any card that you take is legal to be played in your deck. There's no 2-color restriction, because it would be way too hard in how the game is
Right.
constructed and how the cards are built. You also can. No, I think that's it. I think that's about right.
Yep. Those are the rules for draft that we've gotten so far.
Okay, and it's 40 card deck, right? So you're only
Right.
cutting 8 cards. All right. And now
Exactly.
for sealed deck, what's sealed deck like? Have you heard about sealed deck? I actually am unsure how sealed deck works, or if there even is sealed deck.
No, so the closest I've heard is at Gen Con, right? The starter deck event where you got to add, I believe it was 3 packs to your starter deck.
Hmm.
But I haven't heard any. I imagine it was probably in an email that got sent out to LGS owners, but I would guess just 4 packs. No, it was 6 packs I might have heard with 40 card decks and still no color restrictions. I believe that's the sealed rules, but
Cool.
don't quote me.
All right, so those are the different kinds of limited you can play. Personally, I love the 2-color restriction, and I would
Yep.
love if we found a way to play limited where the 2-color restriction is just like a real thing, and it's always a
Right.
real thing, because otherwise, there's just different rules for different formats, and we've talked about that kind of thing in Magic for 2 decades, having different
Right.
mulligan rules, having different, drawing number of cards in a turn rules and stuff like that. And I just don't feel like that's in the spirit of things. I would love the like sealed deck, or the limited Pro Tour qualifier format or equivalent, to be the precon, the starter decks that we can buy, and then, like you said, just
Hmm.
open 3 boosters and juice them. But I want to juice them with only cards of the colors that you open, right? And
Right.
so, do you think it would be feasible to do like, okay, open up 3 booster packs, check your rares, and then you can choose your starter deck after?
Right. So yeah, this is my preferred way of playing with the starter decks. This is something I really want to try out because the way it worked at, Gen Con, right, where they hand you a starter deck and then you open your packs, they did allow any color, but if you wanted to have color restrictions, opening those packs would not really be a great experience, right? Because there's about on average 2 cards of every color in every pack. So I believe that comes out to 12 cards out of 36. Those are the only ones you care about when you open your packs.
Yeah, some of those might not
So
even be very good. So
exactly. So I really think the strategic decision of looking at your cards in your packs and then deciding what deck would I most like to add these to, which 2 colors of these cards do I want to lean towards, I think is really interesting, and I'm looking forward to getting a chance to try that out.
yeah, awesome. Me too. I think the color identity thing is just a nice focal point for deck building. It's
Right.
a really good restriction. And when I heard that limited was prismatic, where you could play any color, it turned me off a little bit. I'm not gonna lie. I'm still very excited about the game. Still very excited about constructed. Limited, unless we can figure out a way to kind of fuse both worlds together. I think I'll probably stick to constructed or just playing the starter decks
Right.
for now. So
I did have and still do have kind of the same concerns about the multicolor, but I did just want to mention I've talked to a couple people that said they were able to get in drafts and that they felt great about it.
really, so the
They
prismatic thing didn't feel weird or bad or whatever. It's just
yeah, they one of the concerns is like, oh, you're just going to be taking the best card out of every pack, but they did feel like based on the cards they had drafted so far that they were leaning towards different choices than maybe just what might look like the best card. Which there's some actual experience testimonial, so I can't really knock the official format too hard, but I'm also want to try alternatives.
yeah. And once we get our hands on some booster packs, you can bet your bottom dollar we're going to be doing some drafts ourselves.
Oh
So
yeah.
all right. So, Matt, we're going to be moving on here to a section that I want you to champion, but I'll give us a little bit of an intro here for. So, the game of Disney's Lorcana is, at its core, relatively simple to learn, but the engine itself is very stretchy, very squishy. There's a lot of room to maneuver. And so far, we've been given roughly 10 keyword abilities that are on multiple cards, and then
Right.
a smattering, just a ton of different abilities that are unique to the characters that they're on. And we're going to talk a little bit about the keyword abilities that Matt's going to go over now. So, Matt, why don't you go ahead and take it away?
Yeah, so the first keyword I want to talk about is bodyguard. I mentioned this earlier on Simba Protective Cub, but overall, this has been one of the most important mechanics in the game, in my experience. This is only in Amber and Steel. There are 4 Amber bodyguards, 3 Steel Amber bodyguards, and 1 item in Steel that kind of boosts a bodyguard deck.
Cool.
But just to explain the mechanic real quick, in case you're not looking at a card right now, bodyguard essentially means 2 things. One of them is an opposing character who challenges one of your characters must choose one with bodyguard if able. And the other is that when you play a bodyguard character, you can choose to play it exerted.
All right.
So,
So I'm going to stop you there just because I want to ask some questions about this. So I know that when
sure.
we were playing, bodyguard is a great way, I think, to protect these like really aggressive creatures that you play, like your 1 mana Lilos that let you, quest for 2 lore.
Right.
And so you want to curve into bodyguards that can protect that Lilo, and you want them to be of reasonable size. But in order to use them, you do have to play them exerted, which does leave them vulnerable to those larger opposing characters, right?
Right. So you will see most of the bodyguards. Mickey Mouse Musketeer has 7 willpower, so it's not really going to be trivial to take these down for your opponent. But the important thing with the bodyguards is they have more toughness than most characters of their cost. So Simba, for example, 2 cost 2/3. maybe one of the only characters in the game with 3 willpower on a 2-cost character. So this means if your opponent is keeping pace with you, they still won't be able to get through a Simba right away if you play it on turn 2 and they're trying to challenge it on their second or third turn.
Awesome. All right, so bodyguard going to be used high willpower to protect your other characters. Now, if 2 characters with bodyguard are on the table at once and both exerted, what
Yep.
happens?
Your opponent still must challenge something with bodyguard if they want to challenge anything at all, but they can choose which of those characters they want to challenge first.
Awesome. I know in Magic we've had different abilities that had caveats, and if there's multiple of the same, sometimes the owner gets to pick. But yeah, I mean, great. That's awesome because you can get really confusing in a game like this because you don't
Right.
interact on your opponent's turn at all, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, so this is one of the ways of influencing what your opponent is able to do. There's not all that many, but bodyguard definitely stands out as a way to restrict your opponent's options.
All right. So now that we've learned about bodyguard, let's move on to the next ability you'd like to talk about.
Next up is Rush. I wanted to talk about Rush second because it's actually one of the better counters to Bodyguard. So Rush means that this character is able to challenge on the turn you play it. It can't quest and it can't sing, but Rafiki, for example, 3 costs, 3 power, 3 strength, 3 willpower, and Rush, you can play it on turn 3 and challenge something right away.
Yeah, Rafiki seems like a great like mid game card that you can use to challenge your opponent's 1 and 2 cost characters, and maybe catch you
Right.
back up in spots where your deck's maybe a little too slow and you're starting to fall behind on lore.
Right. So, if you think about, a typical game, both players play a character on turn 1, and then maybe the Amber player plays a Simba and gets to quest with their Lilo. Uh, that's one of the key interactions for the Simba player is I can now safely quest with my Lilo, even though my opponent has a character already,
Yeah.
because my Simba is going to protect it. Rafiki and other Rush characters, of course, but particularly Rafiki, kind of flips all that on his head. You play Rafiki, you challenge Simba, now your other characters can challenge the Lilo, the Aladdin, whatever Simba was protecting.
Right, and Rush I think is a really undervalued mechanic right now, but Maui, I don't
Hero to
remember
all.
Hero to All is just such an incredible card. Every time my opponent's played it against
Right.
me, it's just like completely squashed my biggest, exerted
Yep.
character, and then still had 2 or 3 toughness left over. It has a million strength compared to how much it costs to actually
Yeah.
play. And honestly, the enchanted foil looks gorgeous. So,
Oh yeah, I bet.
all right.
And there is actually one more thing I wanted to mention about these 2 keywords that's kind of fundamental to like understanding the game engine, and that's that Bodyguard is kind of an aggressive mechanic, and Rush is definitely a defensive mechanic.
That's really cool to think about because in Magic, when something has haste, right, it can come in, it can attack that
Yep.
turn. But in here and in the game in general, attacking is a mostly defensive maneuver.
Exactly. So Maui Hero to All we mentioned 5 cost, 6/5 with Rush and Reckless, which means it can't quest and has to challenge. Maui is a defensive card. You're trying to get rid of your opponent's characters right away before they can quest again, and try to which is what your opponent's trying to do to end the game. So yeah, Rush. That's something I really want to hammer home is that Rush cards are defensive. They're going to be used in control decks to slow the game down.
Yeah, I love it. All right, tell me about the next mechanic on the list.
Next up, just real quick, the one I just mentioned that Maui also has is Reckless.
Mhm.
Reckless says this character can't quest and must challenge each turn if able.
Now,
Uh,
I've seen a card give reckless to an opposing character. I thought
right.
that was pretty interesting. Is that something that you think will be like a reused mechanic?
Yeah, so there's a couple of these cards, Iago, John Silver, and the Beast is Mine, which is an action that gives a character reckless. This is just kind of taking advantage of that is a downside. If you have a large character and you give your opponent's character reckless, they maybe have to challenge it and just lose their character altogether. But at the very least, they can't quest with that character. I haven't been super impressed with this mechanic. John Silver is pretty good and does make use of it. But overall, the most impressive Reckless cards to me have been Maui Hero to All and Gaston Arrogant Hunter. Gaston is a 2-cost 4/2 with just Reckless, and that's like pretty overstated, right? That's a large character.
Yes. I mean, large strength for sure, and allows it to challenge, larger characters from your opponent's side via willpower. And I think that'll be
Right.
great with things like the 3-cost Elsa that lets you exert it to exert an opposing character. And then you can
Right.
use, challenger characters or the Gaston to just beat down on your opponent's stuff. And, I think
Right.
that combination is going to be really strong and one you see quite a bit.
Right. And just to come back to it, we're seeing a lot revolve around Simba here. Gaston is also one of the good ways to keep pace with your opponent's Simba, because if you're going first, you get to play your Gaston, and now their Simba looks pretty bad, right? They're just gonna play it, you get rid of it with your Gaston, and it's an even trade instead of the Simba totally taking over the board.
Yeah, for sure. All right, next up.
Next up, Evasive and Ward. Starting with Evasive, a character with Evasive can only be challenged by another character with Evasive.
All
So
right,
this is kind of
so
like flying in Magic, right?
yeah, kind of. Actually, it kind of seems more like Shadow, right? Shadow is a weird one that people don't really think about too much anymore, except on Dothy Voidwalker, right? But
Right.
evasive is basically just like you can't touch this. Call me MC Hammer.
Right.
Put me on some parachute pants. Now, evasive is just like a very scary keyword for aggressive creatures, things that exert for a lot of lore when they quest, and
Right.
like if you don't have evasive of your own, you have to directly banish it with a spell, or you
Right.
have
And there's only so many cards that do that.
right, or you have to use an evasive character of your own, or there's also some characters that gain evasive sometimes on your own turn, right?
Right. So this is actually a good spot to talk about a card that I haven't been seeing a ton of decks with, but is definitely still on my radar, and that's Genie on the Job. Genie costs 6. He's a 3/4 with 2 lore. He has evasive, and when you play him, you can return a character to their player's hand. So early on, when I started looking into Lorcana and we only had seen like half the cards, Genie was super popular. And the reason for that is you play him, you return your opponent's thing to their hand, right? You get some more board advantage back. But then Genie just kind of sits there questing, and
Forever.
there's
It's
not a
got
lot your opponent can
evasive.
do at it. It's got evasive.
Yeah.
Exactly. And as more cards have come out, we got the last 50 all in one day or whatever. People kind of started looking in directions other than Genie, but this card is like still super impressive to
Mhm.
me. And this is one of the places that I'm going to be looking to like brew around, is try to see where Genie fits into this metagame.
Well, one thing I want to point out about Genie is that in Magic, a lot of times you'll use things like Mana War or bounce effects like Riftwind Cloudskate, and they'll come in and they'll bounce your
Yep.
opponent's stuff and kind of remove that problematic game piece for a turn, while you basically gain some breathing room. You're not dealing with it permanently; you're just kind of dealing with it temporarily. But
Right.
in Lorcana, damage is cumulative; it's permanent. So when you
Mm,
challenge your opponent's stuff, if you're 4/5 challenges your opponent's 4/4, it only needs to take one more hit of damage before it's dead and gone. But with Genie, you can
right.
actually challenge your opponent's stuff, play the Genie, return your own card to your hand, and kind of reset it. And then you
Right.
can use it later, or you can even use it as an ink, right? If you can't play it that turn, it can be something you can play in your
Yeah,
inkwell.
that's cool.
So a lot of really cool stuff, and like mechanics and abilities that we're used to seeing in other games. It's always really fun to me to just see how they interact in a new engine, because that type of thing, bounce your opponent's thing, bounce your own thing, it's like ubiquitous in almost every uh collectible
Right.
card game I've ever played. And here though, with damage being cumulative, I think it's just a dual-sided threat, and also has the awesome evasive ability as well.
Right. So you know where my brain goes when you start talking about returning your own characters to get the damage off them?
Yeah.
It's Tinkerbell Giant Fairy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, so Tinkerbell has that great, on play effect, of course, 1 damage to all your opponent's stuff. But a thing you tend to see happen after you've played your Tinkerbell is you want to challenge with it, get that second ability to into use, do 2 damage to some other thing. But
Puny
you can only do that.
pirates.
You can only do that once or maybe twice before your Tinkerbell just dies, right? Because
Yeah.
it's pretty hard to remove damage from things. Uh, so Tinkerbell, after that first challenge, is kind of a threat that's just sitting there, but it'll be gone before too long. But using Genie to pick my Tinkerbell back up again, that sounds kind of great to me. I'm going to be
Yeah.
looking into that.
All right, cool. I'm glad I've given you some inspiration. All right, now you
Yeah,
talked a little bit about evasive, but there's another ability, ward, that I think requires a little bit of an explanation and also a lot to talk about it.
right. So evasive is this way that you can prevent your opponents from interacting with your characters through challenging. Ward is kind of the opposite. Ward says opponents can't choose this character except to challenge. So that prevents cards like Dragon's Fire or Maleficent Monstrous Dragon that say choose something and banish it, or even Elsa, chosen character is exerted. Things like that. Just no touchy, like Cusco says. You can't choose that.
No, that's really cool. I think that ward is a great ability, and anyone who plays, fantasy games or games that involve magic, they understand that a ward is like a protective spell, and having
Right.
ward on your character just means that it can't be hit with magic, but it can sure be hit with a giant club. and
Right.
and
Right.
invasive, like you said, is kind of the opposite, where it can't be challenged, it can't be hit with a giant club. You can't beat up Genie with a baseball bat. He'll just laugh it off and disappear behind you and put like a top hat on your head or whatever, and then pull a rabbit out of it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but you can certainly hit Genie with magic. It's hard because he's very strong in magic, but.
Right. So this is going to be an interesting thing to watch, right? As the competitive metagame develops, if things are leaning towards more towards characters challenging each other in play, you might start to see evasive picking up. But then once people start playing removal spells like Dragon's Fire to answer those evasive characters, I wonder if we'll start seeing Ward creep back in.
Yeah, I mean, I think that both have their place. They just
Yeah.
seem like strong abilities that bottleneck your opponent in one way or another, and you could probably just fill your deck with both sides of it, and your opponent's just going to draw the wrong type of answer at the wrong time and just get hosed from it.
Right. So that's Ward. There's only a few characters with that. Let's move on actually to support. Support is interesting. There are a few a few sapphire cards and a few amber cards with support. It says whenever this character quests, you may add their strength to another chosen character's strength this turn.
Okay, so strength is only for challenging other characters. So you're going to see this probably
Right.
with like low strength characters kind of combining when they're activating for lore or some of their abilities, and they're going to give their strength essentially to one character, and then that character is going to go in and battle.
This is not an ability that I've seen come up all too often. Maybe because a lot of the games I've been playing have been a little less focused around challenging, especially later in the game. But it definitely can do some super powerful stuff. So we've got this card, the good horse?
Oh yeah,
Talking about
Maximus.
Maximus, Palace Horse. Maximus is a 5-cost 4/5 with 1 lore who says bodyguard and support.
Nice. Now,
So
when you play it as a bodyguard, does it also support when you play it as a bodyguard?
no, support is only when a character quests specifically.
Oh, that's still cool though. I thought that would be
Oh
like a
yeah.
nice little melding of the abilities, but you can't have Maximus be too OP. He's already pretty OP if you ask me.
Yeah, it just means you're incentivized to keep questing with Maximus, so he stays exerted on your opponent's turn to protect your characters. And then it can really be a problem for your opponent when you have, a small creature like maybe 1-cost Simba or something like that just sitting around in play, and then you get to quest with your Maximus, your Simba gets +4 power and just trades off for your opponent's Tinkerbell or something like that.
Yeah.
It's really something your opponents have to worry about.
I actually really love that mechanic's in Amber as well, because Amber is the color that heals, right? Rapunzel, there's a couple other cards that
Right.
can heal. And when you're lending your strength to a smaller character than maybe a small character that has 3, 4, 5 willpower, sometimes you get in and you get to chew up like a larger opposing character and keep yours on the table. And then when you do that, you get to do Rapunzel, draw 2 or 3 cards, and
Right.
it's very hard to come back from that if you're an opponent, especially if Maximus is still bodyguarding everybody.
Right. So I think it's kind of hard to build a deck around support because you kind of have to count on your opponents being being able to be challenged and being weak to that. But there are a few interesting cards with support that I'm wondering if they'll sneak their way into decks at some point. Like
Do you think the Elsas that can exert your opponent's stuff, do you think those will work really well with like not only the ability we're talking about, but also with like Challenger, like where your characters can just attack more
right.
when they're pressuring your opponent's creatures?
Yeah, that's definitely a good place to look. Just being able to manipulate things into the place where your combat abilities are relevant. Uh, One of the cards I really haven't seen, seeing much play right now is Philoctetes. Apologies to Phil. I don't know how to
Just
pronounce
say
that.
Phil. He went by
It's
Phil the
Phil.
whole movie. He says just Phil. It's Danny
He's
DeVito. It's Phil from Hercules.
all right. Danny DeVito. 2 cost Sapphire card, 3/1 with support. This is kind of an interesting stat line. Is extremely cheap, and is almost guaranteed to be able to pump something else up enough to trade for kind of whatever you want on your opponent's side. Right now, maybe not. Maybe people aren't looking at him as much because of cards like Tinkerbell, but this is kind of an interesting card on rate that I'm, looking forward to checking out in the future when we have more cards, maybe.
All right. How many more abilities you got?
We have a couple more. There's Challenger, there's Singer. I want to talk the most about Shift.
Let's do them all kind of down, and we'll just do quickly. We'll just kind of explain what they are because I want everyone to know these keywords,
Sure.
and I don't want to skip over any of them.
Let's say a character has Challenger 2. That means whenever that character challenges, it gets +2 strength.
Now I know there's
So,
a one cost Captain Hook that does that. That's really cool. It's a one
right.
2, and then it has Challenger for 2, so it can trade up for larger characters, but only when it's challenging, right?
Right. That's Captain Hook Forceful Duelist. And I think this card is a pretty good place to look if you're trying to be, a more defensive deck but be able to keep up with the aggressive decks. Because there's another card that trades really well into Simba.
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, you kept talking about 3 willpower on the Simba and how it's good, and I kept thinking, man, that just means my Captain Hooks are going to be great.
Right, right.
All right, next up.
Next up is Singer. Singer means you'll see a card with Singer 5, like Ariel. That means that card can sing songs that cost 5 or less instead of the usual number, which would be 3 on Ariel.
That makes sense. A lot of the Disney princesses were kind of cracked singers or whatever, and
Right.
them just being able to sing bigger songs than what their ink cost is makes sense.
Yeah, so Ariel, I believe we talked about her on our last episode.
Mhm.
Ariel is a pretty powerful card. Um, there are actually only 3 Singer cards in the first chapter. There's Ariel, there's Cinderella Gentle and Kind, who also has Singer 5, and then there's Sebastian Court Composer, which is a 2-cost character with Singer 4. And one of the things that I think about with regards to Singer is there's also not that many songs in the first chapter, right? There's
Mhm.
only 12.
Right.
So if you're looking at these combinations of Singer cards and songs, you can pretty easily narrow down like what you're able to do with what. Like Ariel can sing Whole New World and Let It Go
And
and
grab your
Grab Your
sword.
Sword. And
Yeah.
Grab Your Sword. Yeah.
Yeah.
But Sebastian, the only there's 2 3-cost songs and a 4-cost song, and those are the only ones Sebastian is particularly good at singing. But in future sets, if we start getting really powerful 4-cost songs, we're really going to want to be looking back at Sebastian to see
Yeah.
if he works well with them.
And that's something that we actually do a lot in Magic, when we're testing for
Right.
tournaments and stuff. When a new set comes out, sometimes its ability is like, "Oh, this is kind of cool. I wonder if they're going to print something very specific in the next couple of sets that pairs well with it and offers like a
Right.
powerful 2 card interaction." And with Sebastian, it's pretty easy, right? The next time they make a 4 cost song that has like an extraordinary ability ahead of schedule, like if you're able to cast it on turn 3, there's so many possibilities with Singer, especially on something like Sebastian that's so cheap to begin with.
Right. Or you could go the other direction. As soon as we see maybe a 5 cost character with Singer 7, everyone's gonna go, be prepared, be prepared. I want to sing be prepared with this.
Yes,
I
be
want to get that
prepared.
down on turn 5.
Oh yeah. All right. So how many more abilities left?
Looks like we're just looking at the last one, which is Shift.
All right. What's shift and what are we gonna do with it?
Shift is on primarily more expensive cards. It is an alternate cost to player characters if you put them on top of another character with the same name. So one of your favorites, Stitch Rockstar, normally costs 6, but also has Shift 4. So if you have another Stitch in play, you can pay 4 instead and put Stitch on top of that card.
Yeah, I think that ability is pretty sweet for just allowing your more expensive things to be slightly less expensive.
Yep.
Does it come with any drawbacks?
Not really. You could say if a character has damage on it, it'll still have that damage after it shifts. But for the most part, shifting is an upside because there are no restrictions on what you can do with a shifted character. It can challenge, it can quest, it can sing right away.
Awesome. Okay, that's pretty interesting. Is there any other shift card besides the Stitch Rockstar or the Tinkerbell Giant Fairy that you're like super into that you want to try out and construct it?
Yeah, so uh I'm looking forward to seeing what people do with Dr. Facilier. This is a 7 cost for a 4/5, quests for 3 lore, has shift 5, and says whenever one of your other characters is banished in a challenge, you may return that card to your hand,
It's pretty
which
good.
is a bonkers powerful ability. Yeah,
Yeah, so that's I know that there's a couple of cards that do something similar. The 4 cost Mickey does that with your
right.
broomsticks, the one from
Yeah,
Fantasia. But doing it with any of your characters, that just means your Rafikis are gonna just be able to rush down your opponent's whole side of the table.
right, right. And this is one of the cards really one of the reasons he's on my radar is from playing those starter decks, right?
Right.
Dr. Facilier is in the Amber Amethyst starter deck, and it's just, man, it can be really hard to win when your opponent gets him down.
All right, Matt. So that's all the keywords in Lorcana. Thank you so much for explaining those, and I hope that you at home are able to more readily understand all the abilities that Lorcana has to throw at you. Now, to be clear, those are just the ones that show up across multiple cards, but many of the
Right.
characters, especially the rares and the mythic rares and the legendaries, they have their own special abilities that have their own flavorful name and effect on the game. So make sure you know what all the cards do if you're going to be entering into a tournament, or else you might get surprised by some blasting cannons from your opponent's exile zone or whatever, right? Just because
Yeah.
you just don't know that Captain Hook brings back blasting cannons. So
Yep. Fire the cannons.
yeah. All right. Moving on. I'm gonna take the next, I don't know, a few minutes or whatever. I want to talk about
Sure.
something very specific that we got cooking, and some of this stuff, Matt, you don't even know. So I would love to hear
Okay.
your feedback, and I would love to basically get like the player's perspective on what we're trying to do. Okay. All right.
Sure.
So the Lost Boys are going to be working with Apex Gaming. Apex Gaming is a store in Caldwell, Ohio. We've been currently working with them to run Magic tournaments, and it's not just like standalone Magic events, though. It's a series kind of revolving around Ohio with a bunch of local game stores that Kyle Huck, the owner, has reached out to them and formulated his own Magic series. And he essentially sells invitational qualifiers to these stores, and if they purchase those, they get 1 or 2 qualifications to the invitational that Kyle foots the bill for himself, and they also get a big swag bag that the sponsors provide, and the sponsors right now are Ultimate Guard. Now,
Yeah.
there's nothing at all for Lorcana. in this vein yet because it's brand new, but their organized play system that they've already announced is essentially just focused on store-based play, and I think that that's spectacular. I think that
Yeah.
especially considering the woes of them being unable to get booster packs, like enough to actually sell to their customers and to meet demand, you're going to have, at least for the first few months, you're just going to have very few people that have a full, real, powerful constructed deck with four of all the cards that they want. That's just a lack of supply. And in order to combat that, what I wanted to do is instead of doing like a big open, you know, blowout event for everyone to join, what I want to do is I want to invite 16 of the biggest names in Magic, or 16 of the people who will answer the phone when I call them, and
Yeah.
we're gonna have them come to Caldwell, Ohio, and participate in a 16-person invite only invitational, where we're gonna put up $5,000 in prizes. Okay,
Yep.
how's that sound to you?
That sounds awesome. It's a great way to really show off the game and like what it can be at its peak, right? If you've got these very good players, trying their hardest to get at this prize pool.
Yeah, so that's kind of what we're looking at, and tentative date right now. And this is for y'all at home. This is just what we're working on. I'm very open when it comes to this kind of stuff. We're planning this event for October the 20th weekend, and October the 20th is a Friday. And we're gonna have like a media day on Friday, hopefully, where we do some interviews and we do like deck techs and talk about the decks that people are going to be playing and stuff. And
Mhm.
but that's not all. I want to do LorcanaCon. Okay, that's my
Okay.
dream. My dream is LorcanaCon, and what LorcanaCon is a multi times per year event where we essentially rent out a giant space, whether it's a ballroom in a
Mhm.
Holiday Inn or a big room at a convention center. But what I want to do is I want to have an invitational that is something you can acquire an invite to via playing in a tournament circuit. And the tournament circuit is
Okay.
going to be very similar to what we've been doing with Apex, where the stores around Apex can purchase a qualifier package, and you can play at your
Yeah.
local game store and qualify for the main event at LorcanaCon. That's the dream. Okay. Now, at LorcanaCon, I also want to offer additional festivities for everyone involved. And for the event on 10/28, it's going to be minimal. And I'll say that now because we just don't know exactly how much product we're going to be able to get. I don't know if people are going to be able to
Right.
bring constructed decks in mass. And so for 10/20, we are essentially just going to do the 16-person invite, and then our store is going to be open for anyone to come play Lorcana. And if we have booster packs to do drafts, we'll do that. If we don't, we'll probably just do the league play, like Lorcana has advised all the local game stores to do. But ideally, we have people from all over the industry, and not just in Lorcana, but also in Magic, like where we're from. Like most of our friends play
Yeah.
Magic, and I want to basically bring like the Jerry Thompsons of the world, and I want to bring Mason Clark, and I want to bring streamers, Young Dingo. I want to bring those people into the fold,
Yeah.
and I want them to play Lorcana, maybe even for the first time. Right? I don't really care if they do prep.
Sure.
I just want them to show up and fight. And I want them to see how good the game is. And I want them to have fun the same way that I've been experiencing the game and having fun, which is just
Right.
like very competitive background, but with an eye on flavor, Like I see these cards and I see like special abilities that just have names of things from the movie, or the names of the songs are literally just bursting from my lips whenever I read them out loud. I can't help myself,
Yeah,
right?
I know the feeling.
And so I just want the greater Magic community to see this and to know that there's someone with something like this in the works. Now,
Yeah.
here's my grand vision, and maybe I'm giving it away or whatever. I don't care. This is what I want to do, and if someone copies me, and so be it. Whatever. So next year, I would like to hold 3 invitational events. And at the 3 invitational events, I want one of them to be at the home store in Caldwell, Ohio. And at the other
Mhm.
2, I want to be in major hubs that people can fly to if they want to. I haven't just, we haven't figured out which cities yet. I don't know exactly. This is all just big picture stuff, but I want to do 3
Yeah.
major events. And at this event, I want to do the Lorcana Invitational, which prize pool to be determined. I want to do a Lorcana Open, and that one's some amount to join with a prize pool between $5,000 and $10,000. And then I want to also do a juniors division, and I want kids to be able to come to LorcanaCon with their families, and I want them to feel like they have a space to play against other people of like similar knowledge of the game. And I think it would be really an underwhelming for a younger kid to come to LorcanaCon and play in the main event and just get beat by a deck that's just all chase rares. It's like someone who's been reading articles and stuff. Like, I don't want that type of experience for kids at the beginning, right? I want kids to be able to jump to that when they want to, and the main event's going to be open for everybody. But for the juniors division, I think we want to do 15 and under. And I think 15 is like the perfect age where, you don't really have the ability to drive a car yet. You're still very like sheltered at home most of the time. And like, you just don't have a job most of the time. And you probably don't have much money. And so I think that that's like a good benchmark, but mostly I just want to create a juniors division, mirroring what Wizards of the Coast did for Magic back in the 2000s. Many of my friends, when I was growing up, when I was 16, 17, I had kids that were 15, 14, 13 that were all getting into Magic around the same time as me, and they were able to play in the Junior Super Series. That's what they called it in Magic. And I want to do something very similar for Lorcana, because I feel like kids are going to be 25% or more of the game. And I think that, we just need to make sure that they feel welcome and that they have a pleasant tournament experience. And I think that a juniors division would be perfect. Anyway, Matt, that is my big picture pitch to you. Give me your full, honest thoughts on it.
I mean, just the last thing you said, the junior event is an awesome idea. I hadn't even considered that, but also, I can already feel myself, looking forward to the next LorcanaCon. Like, that sounds like a great thing to look forward to.
I see that big dumb grin on your face.
Am I going to see you at the next LorcanaCon? I hope so.
That kind of thing. Well, you're going to see me there. That's for sure.
I'm going to see you. That was an imaginary character in my head.
All right. Well, that's basically all I got, man. I just wanted to kind of announce what we're working on. Kyle Huck and Taryn Huck from Apex Gaming have been, very kind in their dealings with me, treating me, very respectfully and like an equal. And I really appreciate them a lot. And I've been able to essentially just pitch a lot of my big picture ideas to them, and they love it. And they help facilitate it in whatever way they can. And I'm looking forward to working with them a lot in the future.
Yeah, I loved the first Apex event I was able to go to. Can't wait for the next one. And they're gonna be great at Lorcana. Give us some great support.
They both just enjoy the game too. When I was talking when I told Kyle about what I wanted to do, he's big boss man. He was just like, I want to play in that invitational. I want to fight against the world champion, Nathan Stoyer, who might be coming to the event also, just so you know. So a lot for us on the horizon, and the Lost Boys are going to be working with Apex to help facilitate these events, to help basically bring the magic when it comes to Lorcana, and we're really hoping that y'all join us on our journey. So, but that's all I got for this episode. I don't know if you got anything you want to shout out from this weekend. You got any props or slops? Friends who let you down, or I know that I was supposed to go and bailed on you last minute. I hope that didn't ruin your plans at all.
That happened. So, there's a layup right there. Slops to Todd for bailing.
No, I set myself up.
But props to Bryce Morgan. Bryce is a local grinder from Harrisonburg, Virginia, known for playing Blue Eye Control and Pioneer. And I got to show him Lorcana, and he took to it immediately.
Nice.
And we were playing an aggro deck against a control deck, and he was loving that. And then I said, I also have this combo deck. And he was like, oh yeah, show me that one.
Yeah.
And I said, now do you want to play the combo deck or the control deck? He's like, give me the control deck.
Okay.
And we had, absolute slobber knocker of a game. It was great. He won with like one card left in his deck. And I think I converted him. That's pretty easy to say.
Well, as far as I can tell, it's pretty easy to convert people because it's just a good
That's
game.
true.
It's just a really good game with great flavor and a rock solid IP, and I think it's going to live forever. You know.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right, well, that's going to do it for The Lost Boys, episode number 2. Thank you so much for listening. Make sure to check us out on all of our socials. We'll post that in the show notes. You can check us out on Patreon at patreon.com/lostboys, LOR. That's Lost Boys, LOR. And we post up free articles multiple times per week for y'all to get your competitive fix. We also have, this is going to be playing on YouTube, but it's also going to be available wherever you listen to podcasts. So if you'd rather listen to it in audio forms, we're going to have it on Spotify, Apple, all that. Make sure also to follow us on Twitter, twitter.com/lostboyslor. And yeah, that's going to do it, I think.
Yep.
All
That's
right.
all I got.
Last but not least, I want to give a huge shout out to our show's sponsor. And we have a sponsor out of Fairfax, Virginia, and it's Games and Comics Paradise. Games and Comics Paradise out of Fairfax is your one-stop shop for everything you need in the TCG space, from Pokemon to Yu-Gi-Oh! To Magic the Gathering, and now Lorcana. Make sure to check out gcparadise.com for anything you might need. Big shout out to them for making sure that we can live our dreams, right? All right, well,
Absolutely.
Thanks, Matt, for episode number 2 of The Lost Boys. I'm Tandy. That's Matt. We'll see you next time.